Part of being a great game master is getting more out of your players. One of the best ways to do that is using open-ended questions. Let's get started. Hey everybody, my name's Joe. Welcome to Tabletop Theory, where we take counseling theory and educational theory, mix it together with a whole lot of role-playing game stuff, and help make you a better storyteller. Today, I wanted to talk about something called open-ended questions. Now, some of you have probably heard this phrase before, especially if you work in things like counseling, the mental health field, or maybe even education. If you haven't heard of it, no big deal. Open-ended questions are called open because they run counterpoint to something called a closed-ended question. Learning about open-ended questions in graduate school was pretty much day 2 stuff, and if you understand the idea of what an open-ended question is, you can start to see how it can be useful in something like a role-playing game context in addition to being helpful in something like a counseling context. But in order to do that, it really helps to know what I'm talking about specifically when we're talking about closed-ended questions and open-ended questions. So let's go over that. So the difference between a closed-ended question and an open-ended question lies in how the client or the player can respond to them. A closed-ended question would be something like, do you want to play D&D? The answer to that question can be a yes or a no. It doesn't necessarily allow explicitly for any kind of deviation from that yes or no answer. Now, sometimes if you ask somebody a yes or no question, they can respond in something that's beyond just the typical yes or no. But most of the time, if you ask somebody a yes or no question, that's what you're going to get back, yes or no. An open-ended question usually doesn't get you a yes or no answer. Open-ended questions have something to do with a how, a why, a where, a when. All of those different things can, generally speaking, elicit far greater and more in-depth responses from the person you're asking the question to. The ubiquitous question that everybody from Dungeons & Dragons seems to know about that's open-ended is from Matt Mercer. How do you want to do this? That question usually shows up right when someone's about to deal the killing blow to some kind of monster or foe in Critical Role, and everybody gets really excited about it because, it means the combat's been victorious. But the thing that's important about that is the how do you want to do this? It's not do you want to deal the killing blow, it's how do you want to do this? And Matt Mercer doesn't even stipulate the whole killing blow aspect of it. It can be anything that the player wants because it's a vague enough question that is referred to contextually in something very specific. How, being the act of completing the combat, do you, the player, want to do this? This being the killing stroke, the killing blow. What kind of blow is left up to the player? It's very open, but at the same time, the player understands contextually from the question how they can actually start to think creatively about the answer to that specific situation. Now, to me, the use of both open and closed-ended questions is really important because it's really tough to be a good GM and only use open-ended questions, and it's also really kind of hard to be a good GM and only use closed-ended questions. The point of this video isn't to say you should never use closed-ended questions, it's just to understand the difference between the two of them so that when you feel like the situation arises where you can use open-ended questions, you can do so in a more intentional and appropriate manner. Another good example of this that I hear people ask about sometimes on Reddit or online or in Facebook or wherever is the idea of how can I make my campaign less railroady? And railroady in this context basically means that the players have a clear course of action that they're not going to deviate from because the GM has a really specific idea how they want the actual game to progress. Making a game less railroady can actually become fairly simple whenever you're using something like an open-ended question. As an example, if you want to make a game less railroady, consider having your group of players arrive at a fork in the road. You may want to know which direction they go. Do they go left or do they go right? The closed-ended question to that is, do you want to go left or right? And the players can choose only between those options. But if you ask the question a little bit differently to say something like, what do you want to do? When they arrive at the fork in the road, you can give them both options. You know intrinsically from description of the scene that there is a fork to the left and a fork to the right, that the players probably understand that those are two options that they can have. But if you ask it differently, what do you want to do? It gives the players an opportunity to possibly think of other options, maybe not left or right. Maybe they want to go straight up the middle. Maybe they don't want to go those directions at all. Maybe they want to turn around and go home. Maybe they want to make a camp. Maybe they want to send out some players one direction and some players another direction. The point is, instead of asking all of those those different questions, you're giving them an option to think for themselves in a way that fits their characters and the scene, instead of asking left or right. You're asking, what do you want to do? The other benefit of something like an open-ended question is that it can help some players who might feel a little less comfortable describing something in sort of an open and creative manner. If you have players that are new to the whole idea of what a role-playing game is, open-ended questions might actually be the way to go to help them start to feel more comfortable in the roles they're playing inside of your game. But sometimes open-ended questions can feel intimidating to new players who aren't used to that type of open-world creativity that comes with a pen and paper role-playing game. If you're used to playing something like a computer game or a video game, you end up with players that might only be used to a set group of parameters that they can choose to pursue, as opposed to having the entire world at their disposal in something like a role-playing game where the world is truly as limitless as the GM and the players make it. Some of the best open-ended questions actually get asked during character creation. My very first video that I ever produced for this channel actually goes into 5 open-ended questions that I feel like were pretty helpful to getting players to think about the more deep aspects of their characters whenever they're starting to make a character for the first time, or maybe they want to make a character and have a little bit more involvement in them. Why are they in a party? Why are they willing to put themselves in danger? Why are they adventuring? Why are they leaving home? And what are their goals? All of those questions, whenever you look at them as a group, are all pretty open-ended, and they give the player the opportunity to really think more in depth about how their character is going to interact with the world around them based on the character's past experiences. You can start to ask more in-depth closed-ended questions. Are they rich? Are they poor? Are they magic users? Are they non-magic users? But for the most part, open-ended questions really help players get more into the minds of their characters whenever they're creating them for the first time. In fact, I think some of the best questions that ever got asked for character creation actually come from a lot of the World of Darkness core books, like Vampire the Masquerade, Mage the Ascension, Werewolf the Apocalypse, Wraith the Oblivion. All of those different books have really great questions in the character creation session that help players that might be new to the actual system get more involved in how they might create a character that fits specifically into the world that they're about to play in. There are other really great open-ended questions that you can ask your players when you're getting into the game that you might actually want to bust out periodically. Here's a few of them right now that I think might actually be really useful and you might want to think about using in your next game. Now, I know I've talked a lot about open-ended questions, but at the same time, if you're used to working with closed-ended questions as a storyteller, these are some questions that I hear people asking regularly as closed-ended questions that I feel like there are some pretty good open-ended alternatives. So some of these questions might seem like they're closed by nature and there's not really any other way to ask them, but at the same time, follow me here and you'll kind of see where I'm going for. So the first question is, are you sure you want to do that? I've asked this question myself, and the thing to remember is that this question usually happens right before a player does something that could potentially get their character killed. And asking the question, are you sure you want to do that, is a closed-ended question, because the player's either going to say, yeah, I really do want to attack the dragon with no weapons and no armor. Or they might say, no, you know what, I might actually want to go pick up my equipment and then go attack the dragon. The thing to remember is that you really have given the player only 2 options there. Turning it into an open-ended question actually sounds something like, what are you trying to do? Because sometimes players might put themselves in a situation that they might feel they can completely survive with their characters, whereas other players at the party and the GM are all sitting around the table thinking, what are you doing? You're about to go attack a dragon with no armor and no weapons. And everybody sees it except for the player who's about to go do it. The thing to keep in mind is that if your player doesn't realize what they're doing is potentially dangerous, asking a question like, what are you trying to do, gives them an opportunity to actually think about their situation and think about what comes after they do what they're trying to do, and maybe try to visualize some consequences to their action. The other thing to keep in mind about asking, what are you trying to do, is the tone of how you ask it. You don't necessarily want to be accusatory when you do it. The whole idea of, what are you trying to do, sounds really dismissive as opposed to something like, what are you trying to do? Asking for explanation as opposed to being accusatory can make a huge difference in helping a player feel comfortable actually describing what they're planning on doing in the moment. Another one that I hear oftentimes is, do you open the chest, or do you open the door, or do you go in? And I get it, doors gotta be opened, chests gotta be investigated, and dungeons need to be entered, but at the same time, asking a question, do you do this, is a closed-ended question. Do you open the chest? There's a yes or no option, because you either do or you don't. Alternatively, turning something like "do you open the chest" into an open-ended question kind of goes back to the idea of that fork in the road that we were talking about a little while ago. Instead of "do you open the chest," it becomes "what do you do?" It's the exact same thing about going left or right on the road. You give the players an opportunity to think more critically and maybe come up with options other than just "I do open" or "I don't open," that their character might want to do a little bit more investigation, say checking for traps, or trying to do a little bit of surveillance, or trying to ascertain some more information about the environment. The nice thing about asking an open-ended question in that situation is that if your players do choose to do a little bit more investigation or try to come up with something other than just a yes or no answer, it gives you, the GM, an opportunity to really build the world. If your players are trying to find more information out about where they are and what's going on around them, it gives you, the storyteller, an opportunity to really follow them and be a part of that world building that you may have already spent quite a bit of time doing on your own, or you might have already done enough research in the one-shot or the pre-planned adventure that you're running to actually come up with something that could be useful for them down the road. More description leads to more involvement from the characters and from the players, and more open-ended questions help to create that situation. So you kind of get the idea of turning a closed-ended question into an open-ended question, but I did want to give you some more examples of some other open-ended questions that I feel like would be really helpful to you as a storyteller, or as somebody who might be wanting to get into storytelling, that you might want to think about asking your players the next time you're in a certain situation. So the question of "how is your character feeling?" or "how are they feeling?" is something that actually gives players an opportunity to think more critically about what their character may be feeling in the environment they're in currently. Are they afraid? Are they brave? Are they hot? Are they cold? Are they freezing? Are they hungry? Are they bored? All of those different things really might not be something your player has thought about in a certain situation, especially if they're dealing with something that's clear and present in front of them, like the middle of a combat, or they might have just finished a combat. If you take the time to ask them, "how are you feeling?" You can ask the whole party, you can ask an individual player, or the other thing that you can do is, if there's a plot hook that you might feel like a player has missed but a character might be a little bit more aware of, "how are you doing?" or "how are you feeling?" might give them the opportunity to reflect on a situation before they actually move forward in game. Because you might have put something out there like a plot hook or a hint or something that they may have missed, and asking them how they're doing can give them an opportunity to step back, reflect, and think about all of the information that they have at their disposal. Remember, a player always knows more about how their character is doing than the GM, because as the GM, it's your job to keep everything else other than the player's feelings in mind for the world around them. Yes, you absolutely need to keep a bead on how everybody's doing and their general comfort level, but at the same time, you're never going to know as much about the character as the player who's playing them. So keep that in mind whenever you do want to stop to ask, "how are you feeling?" Another really good question that I've actually heard people ask before is, "what do you think it means?" Whenever you're dealing with situations that might have something to do with a plot hook or a puzzle or a situation where there's a lot of cryptic information that maybe the players don't understand, taking the time to stop and ask, "what do you think that means?" actually gives them, again, a chance to reflect and maybe ponder through some of the information and potentially collaborate with the rest of their party. The question's really helpful because it can give your players an opportunity to think about what the next few steps in the adventure might be. Instead of asking, "how are you feeling?" which is more of a personalized question based on a character, "what do you think it means?" actually encourages collaboration between all of the players and their characters. Additionally, you can use this question as a GM asked through an NPC to a player. And the reason I really like that is because whenever you ask a character in-game, "what do you think it means?" the player then has to step into the thought process of the character they're playing and start to try to interpret information through that character's point of view. Yeah, they're probably already doing that to a degree since they are playing a role-playing game, but asking a question like that in the moment to try to get your player to describe how they're interpreting information through the character's eyes or ears or nose or whatever gives you a lot more of an opportunity to see how your player might feel like their characters are interpreting information, which can in turn give you a lot more information as the storyteller to how to present information in the future. Another one that's actually kind of interesting is the question of, "what do you see?" Now, that question is, to me, it's a little daunting. The thing is, if you have your players in Dungeons & Dragons, for example, or for that matter, Shadowrun, walk into a shop where there's tons of items to be purchased, and you, the GM, want to know what they see, it creates sort of an interesting situation where the players then describe the things that they see and the things that they can get. Now, this could end up with your players basically saying, I see somebody ready to give me $1 million. That is potentially something that can derail the game and be a little bit game breaky, but at the same time, the idea of asking your players for their involvement in getting them to try to describe the setting around them that you may have already started to describe can help them get involved in building the world and help create a new level of involvement that they may not have actually been involved in previously. I've been a part of a couple of campaigns where storytellers have done this, and it's always resulted in some pretty interesting things. And for the most part, I've been playing with those groups for a long time up till that point when the question was asked, what do you see? And getting the players involved in actually helping to create the world, because I had trust with my GM and I knew how the campaign was running, and I knew that if I answered in a way that would sort of, I see somebody ready to give me $1 million, would be a little bit inappropriate to try to not necessarily fit into the world that everybody had worked so hard to create up to that point. So the only word of warning I'll give about this particular open-ended question is to really be more involved with your players before you ask it. If you've never played with a group before, asking what do you see can really take some new players, especially players that may have never played a role-playing game before. They may not be ready for that kind of control or involvement or power in the world that they're playing in. They may want to leave that stuff up to the realm of the game master instead of taking it on themselves as players. Using open-ended questions can really help get players involved more in the world that they're playing in and in the story that they're involved in. It can also really help them get involved in their characters, whether it's in the game themselves or in the backstory that they're trying to create before they actually sit down to play. So remember, if you're trying to get your players more involved, think about the idea of whether or not an open-ended question could be the right thing to ask in a given situation. So that's all I've got. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I appreciate you taking the time to be here. I really want to know, what are some other open-ended questions that you feel like would be appropriate to ask your players, or maybe some questions that you've asked your players in the past, or maybe been asked as a player? You can leave them here in the comments section below, or you can comment on Twitter or Instagram, and I want to know how you feel about open-ended questions. I don't want to know whether or not you think they're good or bad, because that's a closed-ended way to approach it, but if you let me know how you feel about open-ended questions in general, and if there's any that you feel like you want to leave in the comment section, I really want to know. Thank you so much for watching. So the holiday season is right around the corner, and for a lot of people this can be a really wonderful time full of family and friends and gathering. And even though it's COVID right now, if you're lucky enough to live in a place where you actually get to have constant, consistent contact with your family, I'm happy for you. But on the other side of the same coin, the holidays can also be a time of anxiety and stress and maybe some reliving of some unpleasant memories for a lot of people. And I want to give you all a little bit of encouragement. I know it's tough. The holidays are a stressful time sometimes, but you've made it through the past holidays and you're here now, and you're going to be able to make it through the next one. If you feel like you have concerns or fears about getting through the holidays because of some things that have gone on, maybe in your family or with your friends, think about having something called a contact buddy. Maybe designate a friend or a family member that you trust and give them a heads up that you might be giving them a call or a text during a stressful time over the holidays for a little bit of encouragement or a little bit of backup, or just maybe to talk. If you let somebody know this ahead of time, chances are you probably have somebody in your life who you feel like would be a good person for this. So a holiday contact buddy actually is something that could be useful not just during the holidays, but whenever you feel like there's a situation that might be a little bit overwhelming. Additionally, if you feel like you can be that for somebody, you may want to offer that as a solution if somebody in your life usually has a hard time around holidays because of stress or family or something like seasonal affective disorder. A quick check-in from you to somebody like a friend or family member who you might not have talked to in a little while, or you know could use a little bit of extra encouragement around this time of year, is always a good idea. Either way, thanks so much for watching. Take care, be kind, and have fun adventuring.